Growth has a grammar that most founders never question. The business should always be expanding. Forward motion should always be the goal. Stopping, even deliberately, reads as failure. That assumption is so embedded in how founders think that the most intelligent strategic move available at certain stages of an operation, deliberate consolidation, gets misread as retreat every single time. And the founders who eventually figure out the difference are almost always the ones who already paid the price of not knowing it. You think stopping growth means the business is failing. It means the business has reached the point where more volume will cost more than it returns. Growth is not always the highest value action available. At a certain stage of every operation, the highest value action is consolidation. Not because the ambition is gone, because the architecture needs to catch up with the speed. The founders who stop deliberately are not retreating. They are creating the conditions that make the next phase of growth actually whole. The distinction between stopping and stagnating is entirely about intention. Stagnation is what happens when growth stops because the business ran out of momentum. Deliberate consolidation is what happens when the founder looks at the current architecture, identifies the gaps that will fracture under more volume, and makes a conscious decision to close those gaps before adding the load. From the outside, those two things look identical. From the inside, they are completely different operations with completely different outcomes. One is the business losing. The other is the founder choosing. You think the right response to a slowing business is to accelerate. In most cases, the business is not slowing because you need more speed. It is slowing because the current architecture has reached its capacity and is starting to compress under load. Adding more volume to a compressed system does not relieve the pressure. It increases it. The founders who diagnose this correctly do not push harder. They stop, assess what is compressing, and rebuild the layer that is limiting the throughput before adding more. That diagnosis requires the founder to do something that feels counterintuitive when the business is under pressure. It requires stepping back from the urgency of the immediate situation long enough to see the structural cause of it. Most founders under pressure do the opposite. They add more effort, more hours, more focus, more intensity. All of that increases the throughput demand on a system that is already at capacity. The system does not get better under that pressure. It gets worse, more slowly, in ways that are harder to trace back to the original cause. You think the goal is to keep growing until you hit your target. The founders who built sustainable operations did not grow continuously. They grew in phases separated by deliberate consolidation periods where the architecture caught up with the volume. Each consolidation made the next growth phase stronger. The ones who grew without consolidating did not hit their targets faster. They hit structural ceilings that cost them months of rebuilding before they could grow again. Continuous growth is not a strategy. It is a bet that the architecture will hold. The architecture almost never holds indefinitely. Every system has a throughput ceiling. The ceiling is not fixed, but it requires deliberate work to raise. That work cannot happen while the system is running at full capacity because the bandwidth required to do architectural work is the same bandwidth that is being consumed by the operation. The consolidation period is when the architectural work gets done. It is the only time it can get done without competing directly with the demands of running the business at load. The resistance to consolidation is also partly social. Stopping growth feels like something you have to explain to clients, to the team, to yourself. Continuing to grow, even when the architecture is fracturing, at least looks like momentum. But the founders who built operations that scaled in a sustained way understood that consolidation was not weakness, it was sequencing. They were not slowing down because they could not handle the growth. They were slowing down so that the next phase of growth would not cost them what the previous unmanaged growth had cost them. That is not a small distinction. It is the difference between building and rebuilding. And most founders spend far more time rebuilding than they ever needed to. There is also a client quality dimension to this that most founders overlook. A business that consolidates before growing again tends to serve clients better during the next growth phase because the architecture has been built to absorb more volume without degrading the delivery. A business that grows without consolidating tends to see delivery quality decline as volume increases because the system was never redesigned to handle more. The clients who arrive during the next growth phase get a worse version of what they were promised, and the clients who were already there experience the decline firsthand. The question worth sitting with is not whether growth should stop. It is whether the current pace of growth is creating the conditions for the next phase of growth or consuming them. If the operation is getting stronger as it grows, the pace is right. If the operation is getting more fragile as it grows, the pace is outrunning the architecture. And the smartest move available is to stop, rebuild the layer that is fracturing, and grow again from a foundation that will actually hold. The founders who understand this do not treat consolidation as a concession. They treat it as a tool. One of the most powerful tools available to any operator who is building something meant to last beyond the first ceiling they hit. And the founders who never learn to use it keep hitting the same ceiling, rebuilding from the same point, and wondering why the progress always seems to cost more than it should. That pattern does not end because the founder becomes more determined. It ends when they become more deliberate. Determination keeps you moving. Deliberateness determines whether the movement is building something or just consuming the energy required to build it. Most founders have plenty of the first. The second is what makes the difference between a business that keeps growing and one that keeps starting over. And knowing the difference between those two things is one of the most valuable things a founder can learn. Next episode, we are going into something that connects directly to this: why most businesses keep growing without ever asking why. Because the decision to stop growing is only available to founders who know what they are growing toward. And most founders have never articulated that clearly enough to know when to stop. I will see you tomorrow.